Good morning, Gators. Today's breakfast biography is Benjamin Banneker, and he was an astronomer and mathematician. This book is compiled by Allison LeSueur. Chapter 1, Planning a City. In 1791, a gray-haired man stood on a hilltop. A wilderness spread out below him. Soon, a great city would be built on the land. The city, Washington, D.C., would be the capital of the United States. The man, Benjamin Banneker, was there to help plan the city. He was the only black member of a small team. Their job was to survey the land. Together, they would figure out where buildings in the new city would be built. Banneker got the job because of his math and astronomy skills. Banneker was a free black man at a time when most blacks were slaves. His work with the surveying team made him one of the most respected scientists of the 1700s. In this image, we see the city of Washington, D.C. that was built along the Potomac River. Growing Up, Chapter 2. Benjamin Banneker was born November 9th, 1731, near Baltimore, Maryland. Banneker's parents, Mary and Robert, were free. So were Banneker's grandparents. Banneker's grandmother was white. She had come to America from England in 1683. She owned a small farm and 2 slaves. In time, she freed her slaves and married one of them. Their daughter was Banneker's mother. When Banneker was 6 years old, his father bought a farm. He grew tobacco and corn. Banneker helped care for the animals and harvest the crops. His father taught him to study the sky for signs of rain or stormy weather. In this image, it's Banneker's lifetime was spent mostly working at tobacco farms. It was rare for a black man to own a farm. Banneker's grandmother took a special interest in her grandson. She taught him to read and write. She used her Bible as the lesson book. During winter, Banneker went to a school run by a religious group called the Quakers. It was unusual for a black child to go to school at that time, but the Quakers believed all people should be treated equally, and Banneker loved reading and math. After a few years, Banneker was old enough to help his father on the farm full-time. He quit school but continued to teach himself. He borrowed books when he could, and he studied math on his own. Chapter 3, A Wooden Clock. When Banneker was about 22 years old, he met a man who had a pocket watch. Banneker was fascinated by the watch, and he asked to borrow it. He studied the watch. He took it apart piece by piece to see how it worked. He drew pictures of the wheels and gears inside. Then he decided to build one of his own. The only material Banneker had to work with was wood. He couldn't possibly carve wood into such tiny parts for a watch, so he decided to carve bigger pieces and build a clock. This is an image of his wooden clock, or one that was similar. He collected pieces of wood and carefully carved them. He bought springs, the chime, and a few other pieces that could not be made of wood. After many months, the clock was finished. His clock was the first made with parts entirely from North America, and other people had built clocks, but they had used European parts. This is an image of Banneker, who was considered a quiet and serious man. His clock made him famous. People were amazed that he had the talent to build such a clock. At that time, people thought that black people were not as smart as white people, and people traveled from distant towns to see his clock. He was happy to show it to anyone who asked, and people who had never heard of this quiet farmer now knew all about Banneker and his wooden clock. His clock kept almost perfect time for more than 40 years. There's a quote about his clock from a friend. It says, with his inferior tools, with no other model than a borrowed watch, it cost him long and patient labor to perfect it. Chapter 4, Looking at the Sky. By the time Banneker was 30 years old, both his grandmother and his father had died, and he farmed his father's land and sold crops. In his spare time, he read books. He also taught himself to play the flute and the violin. At the end of a hard day, he enjoyed playing music. Word of Banneker's reading and math abilities spread throughout the area. At the time, few people, black or white, could read. Many of Banneker's neighbors asked him to read letters they received. They also asked him to repair their broken clocks. He was happy to help them, and he treated them with respect and kindness, and slowly he gained their respect in return. He became well known and admired in his community. This picture is of the farm that was near Ellicott Mills in Maryland. Banneker became close friends with his neighbor George Ellicott. Their friendship grew over many years. Sometime in the late 1780s, Ellicott gave Banneker 3 astronomy books. He also gave Banneker some simple instruments for studying the sky. Banneker had learned how to read the sky from his father, but he had never studied the science of astronomy. He read the books and taught himself how to use the instruments. This image shows early astronomers that used telescopes and compasses to study the night sky. Banneker built a work cabin on his farm with a skylight to study the stars. Banneker loved studying the stars. He spent his nights looking at the sky and his days sleeping. His mind was on fire with new ideas about astronomy. Banneker had found a new direction for his life as a scientist of the stars. Banneker successfully predicted a solar eclipse in 1791. And this image is from his journal that he made careful records of what he saw in the sky. In early 1791, Banneker was 59 years old. That year, the U.S. government hired George Ellicott's brother, Andrew, to help survey land for a new capital city. Andrew needed a scientist to be on his surveying team. He remembered Banneker's skills with astronomy and math. Andrew asked Banneker to join the team, and he agreed. In February, the team arrived at the Potomac River to begin planning the new city. Banneker helped make observations and record information. Banneker and his co-workers used compasses, telescopes, and clocks to measure distances. Then other team members tramped through the forest with surveying chains. They marked the placement of each street and building in the new city. Later, workers chopped down trees to clear the land. A few months later, Banneker's part of the job was finished, and he packed up his belongings and returned to his farm. He returned to his study of astronomy. Soon he decided to publish an almanac. Almanacs are books filled with weather predictions, advice for farmers, short stories, and sometimes poetry. He used astronomy and math to make the predictions for his almanac. Banneker's almanac created a sensation. His almanac proved that Black people are just as smart as everyone else. His quote from James McHenry in the introduction to the 1792 edition of Banneker's Almanac: "I consider this proof that the powers of the mind are disconnected with the color of the skin." In August 1791, Banneker sent a letter to U.S. Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson. He also included a copy of his almanac. In the letter, Banneker explained that he believed that slavery was wrong. He also said that he was proof that Black people were intelligent and creative. It was a bold letter for a Black man to write. Jefferson sent Banneker a kind response. He promised to send the almanac to the Royal Academy of Sciences in Paris, France, as proof of the talents of Black people. In his letter to Thomas Jefferson, Banneker called for an end to slavery. Thomas Jefferson exchanged letters with Banneker in 1791, 9 years before becoming the President of the United States. Banneker published 6 almanacs from 1792 to 1797. The first one sold many copies. Banneker made enough money from the almanacs to live comfortably, but they did not make him rich. During the last few years of his life, he stopped farming. He still grew a garden and continued studying astronomy. He began to experience the aches and pains of old age. He never stopped reading books and studying the stars. On October 9th, 1806, he took his usual walk. He began to feel ill, went home, laid down, and a short time later died. He was 1 month away from his 75th birthday. This is an image of Banneker's portrait as it appeared on the title page of his 1795 almanac. During the funeral 2 days later, Banneker's house burned to the ground. The Ellicotts saved some of Banneker's personal items, including his journal and his wooden clocks. Everything else was destroyed. Over the years, his journal made its way to the Maryland Historical Society, but the clock had disappeared. Banneker is one of the most respected early African-American scientists. He proved that a person's intelligence is not determined by the color of one's skin. In 1980, the U.S. Postal Service created a stamp in honor of Banneker. Here's an image of that stamp. There's several facts about Benjamin Banneker on this page. Among his achievements are that he built a working clock using a pocket watch as a model. He taught himself mathematics and astronomy. He assisted in surveying the Washington, D.C., published several popular almanacs. He is self-educated. There's a timeline at the back of the book that begins in 1731 and ends in 1806. There's a glossary of terms, including almanac, astronomy, observation, prediction, Quaker, and survey. There's a list of internet sites where you can learn more about Benjamin Banneker, and you can also read more at some of these books that you can find. There's an index at the back of the book. If you're interested in reading more about Benjamin Banneker, this book can be placed on hold for me to check out and bag and put out front for you to pick up. I also have several other books about Benjamin Banneker you might be interested in. Thanks for joining me for our breakfast biography, and I hope you have a great day, Gators.